The ledger contained many names, inscriptions in languages dead before kingdoms rose, soul after soul, debt after debt, each one collected with the precision of a merchant tallying coin, ink that never faded, parchment that never yellowed, records stretching back through centuries that had witnessed empires crumble into dust, while the ledger remained pristine. The man of glass kept accounts. Master Mira remembered every bargain struck, every word spoken at crossroads where two paths met and choices had to be made, every desperate plea whispered in darkness, every reckless wish thrown at fate like dice across a table. He remembered them all, the nobleman who wanted wealth, the scholar who craved knowledge, the lover who sought beauty, the warrior who demanded strength. He remembered what they asked for. He remembered what they received instead. But some pages remained empty. Not many. Across millennia of dealings with desperate mortals, across countless contracts written in blood and sealed with impossible clauses, across bargains struck in taverns and temples, and lonely roads where desperation made fools of even the wisest, the failures numbered precious few, a handful, perhaps fewer than the fingers on one hand, spread across ages that had seen continents reshaped and bloodlines extinguished, yet they existed, souls that slipped through fingers that had grasped so many others, debts left uncollected despite all the careful wording, all the twisted interpretations, all the patient waiting for conditions to align, names that should have been inscribed but remained absent, victories for mortals in a game where the dealer controlled every card. These absences haunted the ledger more than the names recorded within it, because each empty page represented something Master Mira rarely experienced. Each blank space told a story of failure, of limitation, of being outmaneuvered by creatures whose lifespans measured mere decades against his eternity. Each missing name was a crack in the facade of inevitability he had cultivated across the ages. The empty pages were wounds to pride that could not heal. The temple of Lilvani stood on a cliff top, ancient stones crumbling under the weight of years. Moss grew between cracks, where mortar had long since surrendered to time and weather. Wind carried the salt taste of distant ocean, the cry of gulls wheeling overhead, the whisper of grass bending beneath invisible pressure. The structure had been sacred once, dedicated to some goddess whose name even the oldest scholars could not recall. Now it served a different purpose. Now it was a place of reckoning. The floor, hidden beneath decades of dust and debris, bore a mosaic, intricate tilework depicting the moon in its full phase, silver against deep blue, crafted by hands that understood beauty even as they built a trap. The artisan who created it had been dead 300 years, had never known what purpose his work would ultimately serve, had laid each tiny piece of colored stone with care, creating something that would outlast empires and serve as the final stage for a bargain made in desperation and sealed in blood. In the spring of 1272, a witcher brought a man to this temple. Olgierd von Everec walked with the bearing of nobility, though his fortunes had risen and fallen and risen again, through means both mundane and supernatural. Tall, broad-shouldered, face that might have been handsome had it shown any expression whatsoever. His clothing spoke of wealth, fine fabrics, quality tailoring, the kind of garments that announced status without vulgarity. But his eyes held nothing, not fear, not hope, not even resignation. The heart of stone had robbed him of such luxuries, leaving only memory of what emotions might have felt like. He moved like a man already dead, had been moving that way for years, decades perhaps. Time lost meaning when nothing mattered, when joy and sorrow became abstract concepts rather than felt experiences, when the woman he loved died, and he felt only vague awareness that something important had occurred, when his brother perished and his heart remained steady, unmoved, as cold as the rock that had replaced it. The Witcher, Geralt of Rivia, white-haired, amber-eyed, carrying blades of silver and steel, had completed 3 impossible tasks, 3 wishes that Olgierd had designed specifically to be unfulfillable. Tasks meant to delay the inevitable forever, to stretch the contract's terms across eternity because they could never be satisfied. Except they had been satisfied. The first wish, bring his brother back for one last night of revelry. Vladimir von Everec had been dead for years, killed fleeing from battle, his body lost to scavengers in time. Yet Geralt had found a way, used von Everec blood. How O'Dimm obtained that blood was never explained. Another mystery wrapped in the Man of Glass's casual omniscience. To perform a summoning, borrowed a body, Let Vladimir's spirit inhabit living flesh for one night, one final celebration before returning to whatever darkness waited beyond death's threshold. The second wish: obtain Maximilian Borsodi's house. Not the physical structure, that would have been merely difficult. No, Olgierd wanted the house itself. The building, impossible to move, and protected by one of the most powerful families in the region. The Borsodis did not part with their possessions, did not bend to threats or bribes. Yet Geralt had infiltrated their vault, had navigated family drama and betrayal and greed, had emerged with a piece of paper granting ownership. The house was Olgierd's. The third wish: retrieve a violet rose from his dead wife, from Iris, whose name Olgierd spoke with the ghost of feeling, the echo of love that the heart of stone could not quite erase. She had been dead for years, mad with grief over her husband's transformation from passionate lover to cold stranger. Her painted world, a realm of memory and sorrow she had created in her final days, had become her prison. Geralt entered that world, walked through Iris's grief made manifest, confronted the pain she had endured, and brought back the rose. The last thing they had shared before everything shattered. 3 impossible wishes, fulfilled. The conditions were met. The contract demanded completion. Gaunter O'Dimm arrived by walking through air itself. Not teleportation, not flight. Simply the casual dismissal of physical law. As if gravity were optional, as if the rules governing lesser beings held no power over him. He walked toward them on nothing, each step as solid as stone despite the empty space beneath his feet. The sky behind him held the bruised colors of evening, purples and oranges bleeding together, clouds painted by a sun that had already surrendered to the western horizon. He looked ordinary, always did. The vagrant's clothing, unremarkable and slightly worn. The pleasant face, forgettable in its averageness. The demeanor of someone who might ask for spare coin or directions to the nearest inn. Everything about his appearance suggested harmlessness, insignificance, the kind of person who vanished from memory moments after passing. Everything except his eyes. The transformation in Olgierd was immediate. The heart of stone cracked. Not physically, though perhaps physically as well, in ways that defied medical understanding, but spiritually, emotionally, the barrier that had separated him from feeling for so long suddenly shattered. Emotion flooded back. Terror came first. The understanding of what approached, what he had bargained away in a moment of desperate ambition years ago, when his fortune had crumbled, and his beloved's family would not permit their union. The full weight of mortality, of soul, of the self that he had traded for temporary gain, crashed over him like a wave, drowning a man who had forgotten how to swim. Then, regret, the memories of what he had done while incapable of caring, the cruelties inflicted on Iris, the woman he loved more than life itself, watching himself hurt her over and over while feeling nothing, watching her descend into madness while some distant part of him understood this was wrong but could not summon the emotion to stop, watching her die while his heart beat steady as a metronome, unchanged, unmoved. Then desperate hope, the thin, fragile possibility that maybe, somehow, this could be avoided, that the bargain could be escaped, that the soul he had wagered so carelessly might remain his own. He could feel again, could love again, could mourn all he had destroyed during his years of enforced indifference, and he could fear. The contract is fulfilled, O'Dimm said, his voice carrying the warmth of spring and the finality of winter's last frost. Each word measured, precise, inevitable, the tone of someone announcing facts that could not be disputed, outcomes that had already been determined before anyone present was born. Olgierd protested. His voice shook. The first time in years, it had carried emotion. The terms, he insisted, required them to stand together on the moon. They stood on a clifftop temple, on stones laid by human hands, in a world that orbited a sun that was not Earth's star, not on any celestial body, not on the satellite that hung in the sky and pulled the tides and marked the passage of months. The clause provided safety, had been designed specifically to be impossible. To stand on the moon, literally, physically, required magic beyond even the most powerful mages, required transportation across the void between worlds, across distances too vast for mortal comprehension. It could not be done, would never be done. The bargain remained incomplete. Must remain incomplete forever. Olgierd had been so clever when he designed those terms, had thought himself cunning, wise, careful, had believed he had found the perfect loophole, a condition that could never be met, a requirement that ensured his soul would remain his own while he enjoyed the benefits O'Dimm provided. O'Dimm smiled. The expression held no warmth, no cruelty either, really, just satisfaction. The look of a craftsman viewing completed work, of a musician hearing a composition's final note resolve exactly as intended. The smile of someone who had known how this would end before it began, who had been patient across decades waiting for this precise moment. With a gesture, barely more than a flutter of fingers, a conductor's casual motion, dust blew away from the floor. Decades of accumulated grime lifted and dispersed as if it had never been, revealing what lay beneath, the mosaic, the moon rendered in tile and stone, detailed enough to show Maria and Highlands, the patterns of light and dark that created the face that looked down on the world each night. Silver and blue and gray, thousands of individual pieces fitted together with artisan's precision, creating an image so accurate it could have been mistaken for the actual satellite if viewed from sufficient distance. They stood on the moon, not the celestial body orbiting in space, no, but a representation of the moon, an image, a symbol. The contract had not specified which moon, had not required the physical satellite, had simply said the moon, and left the interpretation open. O'Dimm had interpreted, as he always did, as he always would. The contract's language had been met, technically, precisely, in the way that mattered for bargains sealed with such entities. The moon was beneath their feet. They stood upon it. The condition was fulfilled. Olgierd's stammering denial died in his throat. The clever clause he had designed, the impossible requirement he had crafted so carefully, had been rendered meaningless by interpretation, by the gap between literal and figurative, between what he meant and what he said. The man of glass moved forward, ready to claim what had been promised years ago, when a desperate nobleman sought to restore his fortune and marry the woman he loved, ready to add one more name to the ledger, one more soul to the collection that stretched back through millennia. The Witcher stepped between them. "I challenge you," Geralt said. The words fell into sudden silence. Even the wind seemed to pause, holding its breath. The gulls stopped their crying. The grass ceased its rustling. The universe itself leaned in to hear what would happen next. Time seemed to hold its breath. O'Dimm's expression shifted. Not anger, but interest. Perhaps even pleasure. A wager. A duel of wits. The one thing his nature could never refuse. The single compulsion that bound him as surely as his contracts bound his victims. According to what was later learned from Professor Shakeslock's research, O'Dimm was, at his core, a gambler. Every deal was a game. Every bargain a bet. Every soul collected was a victory in a contest that had been running since before the conjunction of the spheres brought monsters to this world. To turn down a challenge, to refuse a wager when properly offered, the historical account suggested his nature would not permit it, could not permit it. For what stake? O'Dimm asked, though he already knew. His voice remained pleasant, interested, the tone of someone discussing weather or crop yields rather than eternal damnation. His soul, and mine, double or nothing. The Witcher was wagering his own soul alongside the one he sought to save. If he lost, O'Dimm would claim both, one he had been promised through contract, one freely offered in a moment of heroic foolishness. If he won, both would go free. The stakes could not be higher. The risk could not be greater. O'Dimm's smile widened. "A wager, then," he said. "On my terms." The game had rules. A riddle. A realm of O'Dimm's creation, twisted and dark, filled with temptations and false paths. A time limit, not generous, not allowing for careful contemplation, but enough that someone clever and focused might succeed. If Geralt failed to solve the puzzle before time expired, both souls would be claimed. If he succeeded, both would go free. The terms were clear, the stakes understood, the challenge accepted. O'Dimm transported the Witcher to the realm of rumination. The place defied description. Architecture impossible in the waking world. Stairs that led nowhere, doors opening into walls. Perspective bending until up and down lost meaning. Buildings twisted at angles that hurt to perceive. Corridors stretched longer on the inside than their exteriors could possibly contain. Gravity suggested, rather than insisted, allowing vertical surfaces to serve as floors when convenient. This was O'Dimm's domain, his world, his rules, his realm shaped by will alone, without need for magic's tedious components and incantations. Specters drifted through corridors, remnants of previous failures perhaps, or simply decorations meant to unsettle. They moaned as Geralt passed, reaching with insubstantial fingers, their faces showing terror or sorrow or blank incomprehension. Treasures lay scattered as distractions, gold coins piled in corners, a sword lodged in stone, promising power to whoever could draw it, a legendary weapon worth fortunes, or perhaps just clever bait, the viper-venomous silver sword, ancient and deadly, perfect for slaying the monsters that haunted this world. Geralt drew it, kept moving. The weapon might prove useful, the gold would not. The riddle echoed through the twisted space, O'Dimm's voice coming from everywhere and nowhere. To all things and men I appertain, and yet by some am shunned and disdained. Fondle me and ogle me till insane, but no blow can harm me, cause me pain. Children delight in me, elders take fright, fair maids rejoice and spin. Cry and I weep, yawn and I sleep, smile and I too shall grin. The words repeated, looping, each iteration identical in tone and cadence. A recording playing in the Witcher's mind, impossible to silence or ignore. Geralt moved through the realm, ignoring false lures. His training served him well. Witchers learned early to focus on objectives, to tune out distractions, to move toward goals with single-minded determination. The gold meant nothing. The specters could not truly harm him. The twisted architecture was navigable if one ignored the impossible angles and simply walked forward. Time pressed against him, a weight in the chest, urgency building with each passing moment. Not visible, not audible, but felt. A clock ticking somewhere beyond perception, counting down to failure or success. He could sense it depleting, could feel the window of opportunity narrowing with each step. The mirrors began appearing. Everywhere, dozens of them, hundreds. Reflective surfaces showing his image from every angle, multiplying him into infinity. Tall mirrors, small mirrors, ornate frames, and simple ones. Glass stretched across walls, covered floors, hung from impossible ceilings. The answer seemed obvious. Mirrors. The man of glass. Master mirror. His very name suggested reflective surfaces. The solution must involve these mirrors, must require understanding what they represented. But as Geralt approached them, they shattered. Every single one. Glass exploding into fragments that vanished before hitting ground, leaving nothing but empty frames. Every reflective surface destroyed before answers could be found. He tried touching them gently. They shattered. Try studying them from distance. They shattered. Try speaking to them, reasoning with them, using signs to manipulate them. They shattered, 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 leaving him no closer to solving the riddle than when he began. Time kept draining. The urgency kept building. The specters moaned louder, or perhaps his awareness of them increased as desperation grew. Then he remembered advice given by spirits encountered in another woman's grief-painted world. Iris's painted memories, her constructed realm of sorrow, 2 guardian spirits, one taking the form of a cat, one a dog. Manifestations of protection and love she had left behind. They had warned him, seek glass that cannot be broken. Geralt stopped trying to approach the mirrors, started looking for something else, something that reflected but could not shatter, something that showed images but lacked the fragility of glass. He found a fountain, dry, long, unused, stone basin empty of water, marked by cracks and stains that spoke of decades abandoned. Behind it, a wall, solid stone, no obvious purpose, but his Witcher's training included improvisation, included using the environment as weapon and tool, included seeing possibilities others missed. He struck the wall with force, wind from an open palm, a sign Witchers learned to survive creatures that walked on more than 2 legs. The Ard sign, named in the Elder Speech, capable of generating concussive force strong enough to shatter wood and stone. Stone cracked, water rushed forth. Hidden reservoir, released by the breaking of its containment. The fountain filled, clear water rising from below, bubbling over the basin's edge before settling into stillness, creating a pool, creating a mirror made not of glass, but of water itself. The fountain filled. Geralt looked down into still water and saw not his own reflection, but something else, someone else. O'Dimm stared back from the water's surface, trapped in the one mirror that could not be shattered. Water could be disturbed, could ripple and wave, but could not break the way glass broke, could always return to stillness, always restore its reflective properties. The answer had been in the riddle all along. To all things and men I appertain. Everything has a reflection. Yet by some am shunned and disdained. Some fear or avoid their own reflections, fondle me and ogle me till insane. People stare at their reflections obsessively, but no blow can harm me, cause me pain. Reflections cannot be physically damaged. Children delight in me. Children play with mirrors, love seeing themselves. Elders take fright. The elderly sometimes fear their aged reflections. Fair maids rejoice and spin. Young women admire themselves in mirrors. Cry and I weep, yawn and I sleep, smile and I too shall grin. Reflections mimic expressions. Reflection. The answer was reflection itself. The Witcher reached into the water's surface and pulled. Reality bent. The rules of O'Dimm's realm twisted in ways that hurt to witness. The water was surface and depth simultaneously, was barrier and passage, was mirror and doorway. Geralt's hand passed through and grasped something solid on the other side. O'Dimm emerged. Not the pleasant merchant, not the friendly vagrant, but something else. The mask slipped, the facade cracked, skin pale as death, translucent enough to show veins beneath like dark rivers mapping unknown territories, eyes like a serpent, pupils slit vertical, golden irises containing depths that seemed to stretch back into eternity. Bone structure wrong, cheeks and jaws suggesting something that only wore human form as costume, as convenience, as disguise, donned when dealing with creatures too primitive to comprehend what truly stood before them. His mouth opened. Words emerged in languages that predated the conjunction of the spheres, that came from worlds this realm had never seen, that carried meanings beyond simple translation. Antillean Creole, you're a rooster, and the rooster is king only atop his pile of manure. Georgian, you think you have defeated me? You're mistaken. Ossetian, I cannot be killed. I am leaving now, but I will be back. The translations, later determined by scholars who studied the encounter, carried menace wrapped in respect. Acknowledgement of Geralt's victory combined with promise of eventual return. Admission of defeat alongside assertion of immortality. Then he was gone. Not destroyed, not killed, not even truly banished in any permanent sense. Simply removed from that particular place, that specific confrontation, sent back to whatever realm he inhabited, when not making deals at crossroads and collecting souls at temples with moon mosaics on their floors. Geralt returned to the temple. The transition was instantaneous. One moment standing in the impossible realm, the next back on solid stone under open sky. Olgierd still stood there, alive, free. The mark of O'Dimm's claim dissolved from his face. The Witcher's own face bore no brand. The contract had been rendered void, one debt uncollected. Olgierd looked different. Still tall, still well-dressed, but now his face showed emotion. Tears tracked down his cheeks. Not from sorrow precisely, but from the overwhelming rush of feeling anything, after so long feeling nothing. His hands trembled. His breath came quick and shallow. I don't know what to say, he began. Say nothing, Geralt replied. Just leave, live, be better than you were. Olgierd gave Geralt his sword. Iris, name for the wife he had lost through his own choices and O'Dimm's careful manipulations. A blade of exceptional quality, imbued with properties that made it deadly beyond normal steel. A weapon worth fortunes, or at least worth something to someone who had lost everything that truly mattered. Her name, Olgierd said quietly. So, I never forget. Then he walked away, a mortal man once more, carrying the weight of what he had done while his heart was stone, heading toward an uncertain future, toward penance or redemption, or simply continued existence, heading away from the temple, away from the Witcher, away from the entity that had claimed and lost his soul in the span of decades that must have felt like centuries. The ledger lacked his name. Master Mirror had been outmaneuvered, had accepted a challenge he could not refuse, and had lost fairly according to his own rules. The contract was void. The soul escaped. The debt went uncollected. But this was not the only time Master Mirror had failed to collect what was promised. Not the first time either. Professor Premathine Shakeslock spent his life studying darkness. Not metaphorical darkness, though that too, eventually. No, he began with tangible subjects. Black magic as practiced by hedge witches and desperate mages. Evil cults that worshipped entities better left unnamed. The mechanisms by which malevolent forces operated in the world, the patterns they followed, the vulnerabilities they might possess. He was thorough, methodical, the kind of scholar who read original sources rather than relying on secondary interpretations, who learned dead languages specifically to access texts others could not decipher, who traveled to dangerous places because the information found there existed nowhere else. His research took him to Nilfgaard, to the great libraries in the capital where empires stored knowledge plundered from conquered territories, where books piled in vaults that stretched underground for what seemed like miles, where parchments yellowed in darkness, where information accumulated like sediment building mountains over geological time. He found accounts there, scattered references hidden in margins and footnotes, in passing mentions within texts focused on other subjects, in fragments of older documents copied into newer ones, references to an entity that appeared across cultures, across centuries, across the vast span of recorded history. Many names, always the same pattern, crossroads meetings, impossible bargains, souls claimed through carefully worded contracts that seemed fair until analyzed closely, until the gaps between what was said and what was meant became visible. The accounts dated back millennia, long before the conjunction of the spheres, from worlds that existed before this one, or alongside it, or in dimensions perpendicular to ordinary reality. Everywhere this entity appeared, devastation followed, not always immediate, not always obvious, but always eventual, always inevitable. People called him different things in different places, but one title appeared more frequently than others. Transcribed in ancient languages by scribes who had copied it from sources even older, Evil Incarnate. Shakeslock read, studied, compiled, translated, spent months in those archives, emerging only when necessary, living on bread and water and obsessive need to understand. The texts were difficult, written in languages that required learning not just vocabulary but entire conceptual frameworks alien to modern thinking, written in codes and ciphers designed to protect dangerous knowledge from careless eyes. His eyes began to hurt, natural consequence of reading by candlelight, of squinting at faded ink on crumbling parchment, of pushing his vision to its limits day after day without rest. The pain worsened. His vision blurred. Colors began to fade. Shapes lost definition. By the time he left Nilfgaard and returned to Oxenfurt, Professor Premathine Shakeslock was blind. Not gradually. Not the slow decline that age brings. Just blind. Suddenly. Completely. Irreversibly. His eyes remained physically intact. Physicians examining him found no damage, no disease, no explanation for why they no longer functioned. The organs were healthy. They simply would not see. Reading about Gaunter O'Dimm had cost him his sight. He returned to his home, to the small residence near Oxenfurt Academy, where he had lived for years before his research trip, began organizing his notes, trying to make sense of what he had learned, hoping to publish findings that might help others recognize and avoid this entity. One evening, there was a knock at his door. He answered, awkwardly, still adjusting to blindness, still learning to navigate his own home without sight. Found someone standing on his threshold, a visitor he could not see but could somehow perceive with perfect clarity, as if the blindness that stole everything else made no difference where this particular guest was concerned. "Professor Shakeslock," the visitor said. The voice was pleasant, ordinary, the kind of voice that belonged to merchants and travelers and men who asked for directions. "I wanted to thank you." "For what?" Shakeslock asked, though some part of him already knew. "For your devotion, your research, the care you have shown in studying my existence." O'Dimm, for of course it was O'Dimm, who else could it be, sounded genuinely pleased. So few make such effort. Most hear rumors and dismiss them, or they learn just enough to fear me and stop investigating. But you persisted. You sacrificed. You gave your sight to know me better. I find that touching. I didn't give anything, Shakeslock said. You took it. Did I? O'Dimm's tone remained pleasant. I believe you will find no evidence of my direct intervention. Your eyes failed because of what you read, not because I acted against you. The knowledge itself was the price. Is it my fault that some truths are too heavy for mortal minds to bear? Shakeslock said nothing. What could he say? The entity was technically correct. No curse had been laid. No spell had been cast. The blindness resulted from exposure to information about O'Dimm, not from O'Dimm himself. I wish to reward your dedication, O'Dimm continued, to show my appreciation for a scholar who took me seriously enough to destroy himself in pursuit of understanding. May I enter? The professor wanted to refuse, wanted to slam the door, to hide, to pretend this conversation was not happening. But curiosity, that same obsessive curiosity that had driven him to Nilfgaard, that had cost him his sight, would not allow it. Yes, he heard himself say. O'Dimm entered, crossed the threshold, stood in the small entryway of Shakeslock's home, as if he belonged there, as if he had always been there, as if the walls and roof existed specifically to shelter him. I understand, O'Dimm said, that you wish to help others avoid bargains with me, that you hope to publish your research, to warn the foolish and desperate. A noble goal. Futile, but noble. People will make deals with me regardless of warnings. Desperation makes scholars of us all, and desperate scholars make the poorest students. But I admire the intention. He paused. Shakeslock could not see him but felt him moving, pacing slowly through the room. So I will protect you, O'Dimm continued, will ensure that I cannot harm you, that my power cannot touch you, as a thank you for your interest in my work. Shakeslock heard sounds he could not identify. Chalk on wood, perhaps. The scraping of something being drawn on his floor. O'Dimm spoke as he worked, describing what he created. A circle, inscribed with runes from languages that predated human civilization in this world, filled with symbols that channeled and directed forces Shakeslock could not name. A ward of absolute protection against O'Dimm's direct influence. There, O'Dimm said when he finished. Step inside. You will be safe within that circle. My power cannot reach you there. You are protected, Professor. Protected from me. Shakeslock hesitated. This was a trick. Had to be a trick. Entities like O'Dimm did not offer genuine help, did not create wards to protect their students from themselves. There would be a catch, a loophole, some terrible price, but he stepped inside anyway, because he had no choice, because refusing would change nothing, because at least within the circle he might be safe for a time, might have opportunity to continue his research, might be able to help those who came after even if he could not save himself. The moment he crossed into the circle, he felt it, a barrier, subtle but absolute, a membrane between himself and the entity standing just beyond reach. Perfect, O'Dimm said. Now, one small detail I should mention. The circle protects you completely. Nothing I do can harm you while you remain within it. But the pause stretched. Shakeslock's heart, which had been racing, seemed to stop entirely. Should you leave the circle, O'Dimm continued, his voice still pleasant, still friendly, even for a moment, well, the protection only works if you remain inside. If you step out, you will be at my mercy. And I have so very little mercy, Professor. So little indeed. He left then, simply departed, without farewell or additional threat. Shakeslock stood alone in his circle, blind, trapped, understanding finally the nature of O'Dimm's gift. This was not protection. This was a prison, a cage with invisible bars. He could remain safe indefinitely, but only by staying in a space perhaps 6 feet in diameter, only by never leaving, only by accepting that this circle would be his entire world until he died of old age or went mad from confinement. He could not leave to fetch food, could not access his books, could not reach the washroom. could not do anything except stand or sit or lie within those boundaries, sustained only by whatever supplies happened to be within reach when he stepped inside. Unless someone brought him things, unless someone helped, which required calling for help, which required admitting his situation, which meant involving others in something that had already cost him his sight and would likely cost more before it ended. Professor Shakeslock stood in his protective circle and understood that O'Dimm had destroyed him more thoroughly than any curse could have managed. He lived in that circle for 50 years, half a century standing or sitting in a space barely wider than his outstretched arms. Students brought him food. Colleagues brought books, which they read aloud since his blindness had not improved. The circle became famous in certain scholarly circles. The professor who had trapped himself studying evil, who had become so terrified of his own research that he refused to leave his protective ward. They did not understand. How could they? How could anyone who had not stood face to face with Gaunter O'Dimm possibly comprehend what it meant to exist under his attention? But worst of all were the dreams. At first, nightmares. Terrible visions of what O'Dimm would do if Shakeslock ever stepped beyond the circle. Creative tortures, imaginative agonies. Death stretched across centuries. The dream showed him possibilities in excruciating detail, showed him exactly what waited beyond the protective runes. He woke screaming, every night, for months. Then the nightmares stopped, replaced by something worse. He dreamed of a daughter. She appeared one night, a child, perhaps 5 years old, with his eyes and a smile that lit up darkness. She called him father. He could not see her, but in dreams his vision worked perfectly. Could see every detail of her face, could watch her grow night by night. She was not real. He knew she was not real. He had never married, had never had children, had devoted himself entirely to scholarship. This child was impossible, but she felt real. The dreams continued, night after night. He watched her grow, taught her to read, answered her endless questions, felt the fierce, terrible love that comes with parenthood. This phantom daughter became his world, became the only thing that made the endless days in the circle bearable. For months, these dreams sustained him. This imaginary child gave him reason to endure, gave him hope that maybe, somehow, life was not entirely misery and regret. Then she grew sick. He dreamed her fever, her pain, her fear. He dreamed himself trying to help, trying to save her, calling for physicians who did not exist because she did not exist. He watched her weaken, watched life drain from her small body, heard her calling for him, "Father, Father, help me," and could do nothing. She died in his dreams. He woke screaming again, different screaming than before. Not fear, but grief. Not terror, but agony. The loss of someone who had never been but felt more real than anything else in his life. And he understood. O'Dimm had given him the daughter specifically to take her away, had created love specifically so he could feel it being destroyed, had shown him what it meant to care for something, had let him build attachment and affection and hope, then had demonstrated what it felt like when those things were ripped away. The sophistication of the cruelty was breathtaking. Not crude torture, not simple suffering, but carefully constructed emotional devastation. The gift of love followed by the agony of loss. The dream of a child who never existed, grieved as if she had been real, because in every way that mattered, she had been. This was the entity Professor Shakeslock had studied. This was the nature of the being he had spent his sight to understand. Not randomly malevolent, not thoughtlessly cruel, but artistically evil. Evil with precision, evil with purpose, evil that took time and care to maximize suffering. He spent the next decades in the circle, aging, weakening, teaching when students came to him, but never explaining the truth of his situation. He published what he could, conveyed his research through assistants, tried to ensure that his work would help others recognize and avoid Gaunter O'Dimm. Until one day, late in his life, a witcher came asking questions. Years before, how many years? Time blurred in the circle. A nobleman named Olgierd von Everec had come seeking Shakeslock's expertise, had paid lavishly for research into O'Dimm's nature, for methods to escape a contract already signed, for any weakness that might be exploited. Shakeslock had researched, had told Olgierd everything he learned, had explained that O'Dimm could be challenged to a wager, that he could never resist a gamble. that this was the only known way anyone had ever escaped his contracts, and O'Dimm had appeared shortly after, had drawn the circle, had trapped Shakeslock as punishment for helping someone try to escape. Now another came asking similar questions, a witcher with white hair and yellow eyes, marked by O'Dimm just as Olgierd had been marked. The same situation, decades later. Another desperate person seeking ways to outsmart something that could not be outsmarted. Shakeslock told him everything, explained the one weakness, described the wager, warned about O'Dimm's power and cunning and the futility of resistance, told the Witcher that only one person in all of recorded history had ever successfully beaten O'Dimm at his own game, and walked away with their soul intact. 2 now, the Witcher said quietly. If I succeed. If, Shakeslock agreed. As they spoke, the house settled, old wood creaking, the ceiling beam above, the one O'Dimm had subtly weakened decades ago, finally gave way. The bookcase it supported began to topple. Would have crushed Shakeslock had the Witcher not caught it, held it up through sheer strength while telling the professor to move. But Shakeslock stepped backward, away from danger, trying to avoid being hit. His foot landed on a bottle someone had left near the circle's edge. It rolled. He lost balance, fell, outside the circle. His neck broke on a small pile of books. Ironic to be killed by the very things he had dedicated his life to studying. The crack was audible. His body went limp instantly. Professor Premathine Shakeslock died. Whether this represented an uncollected debt or a collected one remained a matter of interpretation. O'Dimm had promised Shakeslock would be safe within the circle. The promise was kept. Shakeslock was safe from O'Dimm's power while in that space. But O'Dimm had also arranged the environment so that remaining in the circle forever became impossible. The death, when it came, arrived through what appeared to be natural consequence, structural failure, human clumsiness, unfortunate timing, or perhaps unfortunate timing orchestrated by an entity that controlled time itself with a mere clap of his hands. The professor's death occurred immediately after he revealed how to beat O'Dimm. Immediately after he gave information that would allow the Witcher to challenge Master Mirror successfully. The timing suggested more than coincidence, yet no proof existed of direct interference. The beam had been weakening for years. The bottle could have been left by any of the students or colleagues who brought supplies. The fall was natural consequence of losing balance. Those who heard the story later debated endlessly. Some argued that Shakeslock escaped because he died free, outside O'Dimm's direct control, never having signed a contract. His soul, if souls worked the way people believed they did, belonged to no one but himself. He had paid for his research with his sight and his freedom and his sanity, but he had never bargained away his soul. O'Dimm collected nothing from him, not directly, not in the way the contracts typically operated. Others maintained that the torment itself was the collection. 50 years of isolation, the phantom daughter, the constant fear, the knowledge of what waited if he ever made a mistake. Perhaps suffering was the debt, and Shakeslock had paid it in full over decades of living in a 6-foot circle. Or perhaps, and this interpretation gained support among those who understood O'Dimm's nature, he had taken what he wanted after all. Not Shakeslock's soul, but his silence, his knowledge, his ability to help others escape their bargains. The professor died immediately after revealing the method to defeat O'Dimm, ensuring no one else would benefit from his expertise. The ambiguity fit O'Dimm's nature perfectly. Never direct, never obvious. Always working through probability and coincidence and natural consequence. Always leaving room for doubt about whether he had acted at all. The ledger page that might have held Shakeslock's name remained empty. But whether this represented victory or defeat, escape or capture, no one could say with certainty. In Toussaint, where wine flowed like water, and knights still believed in chivalry, an estate crumbled into ruin. The Trastamara hunting cottage, once grand, now surrendered to time and neglect. Walls cracked, roof tiles slipped and shattered on ground below. Windows broke and were never replaced. Gardens that had been carefully manicured returned to wilderness, vines covering structures, thorns growing where paths once allowed passage. The family, noble, wealthy, proud, had fled to Kavir generations ago, left everything behind except their shame. They left their daughter. Marlene de Trastamara had been beautiful once, the kind of beauty that caused poets to write verses and artists to beg for opportunities to capture her likeness. dark hair, sharp eyes, features that combined delicacy with strength, wealthy beyond imagining. The kind of wealth that made even other nobles seem poor by comparison, privileged in ways most people could not comprehend. She threw grand parties, invited all of Toussaint to her table, musicians played, servants brought course after course of exquisite food, wine from cellars that held vintages older than living memory, entertainment that lasted from dusk until dawn, celebrations that became legendary, events that people spoke of for years afterward. She loved being admired, loved being the center of attention, loved knowing that her parties were anticipated, discussed, remembered, loved the power that came from being the one everyone wanted to impress, to befriend, to be seen with. Until one night, during one such celebration, a beggar appeared. He knocked on her door with a wooden bowl and spoon in hand. Simple clothing, worn and patched. The kind of person who walked between towns with nothing but hunger and hope. He asked for food. Politely, humbly, not demanding, just requesting. Following tradition older than the duchy itself, the old tradition, sacred in Toussaint, demanded that property owners provide sustenance to any who asked. Hospitality was duty, was honor, was the foundation upon which civilization rested. To refuse someone food was to reject one's obligations to society, to turn away from the principles that separated humans from beasts. Marlene refused, said she would rather feed scraps to her dogs, said the leftover bones and ruined portions were too good for someone who contributed nothing, who produced nothing, who simply wandered asking for handouts. Said many things, actually, each one crueler than the last, each one demonstrating exactly how much contempt she held for those beneath her station. The beggar stood quietly, let her finish. Then he broke his spoon, snapped it in half with casual strength, the kind of strength that should not exist in someone who appeared so weak, so aged, so harmless. He carved words into her wall, used the broken spoon as stylus, scratching letters into stone that should not have been scratchable. The words appeared as if written with acid, eating into the wall's surface, leaving marks that would never fade. None shall sit and dine with you at your table. No spoon you have shall sate you. Never again shall you wish to spy your reflection in the mirror. Then he left, simply walked away, disappeared into the night without demanding apology or threatening further consequence. The curse had been spoken. The words had been written. What would happen next required no additional intervention. The transformation took time, gradual, subtle at first. Marlene noticed she was always hungry. Not ordinary hunger that could be satisfied by eating, but deep, gnawing hunger that persisted regardless of how much she consumed. She ate constantly, entire meals that should have fed a dozen people, yet the hunger remained. Her appearance changed, skin roughening, features coarsening, the beauty that had been her pride melting away like wax near flame. She stopped looking in mirrors, not because the curse forbade it, but because she could not bear seeing what she was becoming. Her family noticed her eating habits, noticed her changing appearance, noticed how guests stopped coming to parties, how invitations went unanswered, how their daughter was becoming something they could not recognize. They fled, packed their belongings, closed the estate, moved to Kavir where no one knew them, where they could start fresh without the shame of a cursed daughter. They left her behind, in the cottage, in the ruins, in the solitude that Marlene had created through her own cruelty. The transformation completed, Marlene de Trastamara became a spotted wight, not human, not quite monster either, something in between, a creature defined by hunger, by the desperate need to satisfy the unsatisfiable. She hoarded spoons, thousands of them, hanging from trees, piled in corners, decorating walls like macabre artwork. Every spoon a failed attempt to break the curse's second clause. Because she understood the curse now, understood what needed to happen. Someone had to sit and dine with her willingly. Someone had to be sated without using spoons. Someone had to show her a reflection without using a mirror. 3 conditions, all seemingly impossible. She tried for a century, maybe more, captured travelers, forced them to sit at her table, but they didn't come willingly. Fear and force negated the first condition. She offered food without spoons, but no one could be truly sated by the terrible brews she prepared, meals made by a creature that no longer remembered human taste or preferences. She tried showing reflections in water, in polished metal, in anything that might work. But the curse was specific. Not a mirror. Never a mirror. Years became decades. Decades became a century. The cottage fell further into ruin. The estate became legend. A haunted place where travelers disappeared, where a monster dwelled, where foolish adventurers went to prove their courage and never returned. Marlene forgot her original name, forgot what it meant to be human, forgot everything except the hunger and the hopeless attempt to break the curse that had defined her existence for longer than most people lived. In 1275, a witcher arrived seeking white saliva for an alchemical preparation, a potion that required specific ingredients, a contract that brought him to the Trastamara estate. Geralt of Rivia entered cautiously. Witchers learned early that old estates often contained more danger than expected. The spotted wight attacked, not from malice, but from desperation. This was what she did. This was all she could do. Capture, attempt to feed, fail, release or kill, repeat endlessly. But the witcher didn't fight, didn't attack, simply defended, blocking the wight's desperate attempts without returning violence. "I will sit with you," he said, calm, matter of fact. "I will eat what you prepare. Bring food." The wight stopped, stood frozen. No one had ever offered. No one had ever willingly chosen to sit at her table. Every other attempt had involved force, coercion, threats. This was different. She brought her brew, the terrible mixture she had been preparing for decades, constantly refining in hopes that someday someone would eat it willingly. Geralt sat at the ruined table. She sat across from him. They ate together, using hands, using the bowls themselves to drink, using anything except spoons. The hunger began to fade. For the first time in a century, Marlene felt satisfied. Not full. Satisfaction was different, was deeper, was the feeling of a need finally being met rather than merely ignored. When they finished, she looked down into the empty bowl's bottom, saw her reflection in the residue. The last drops of the brew, still slightly liquid, created a reflective surface. Not a mirror, never a mirror, but a reflection nonetheless. All three conditions met simultaneously. The curse shattered, the transformation reversed. Not back to the young woman she had been. Time could not be erased. Years could not be reclaimed. Instead, she became the old woman she would have been naturally had she aged those 100 years. Frail, ancient, skin like parchment, bones visible beneath flesh, but human, free. She ran outside, felt sunlight for the first time in decades, felt air on human skin instead of Wight's hide, felt human again, after so long being something else. Geralt took her to Corvo Bianco, his vineyard estate, offered her a place to stay, employment as his cook, the opportunity to live whatever remained of her natural life in peace rather than isolation. Marlene accepted, became part of his household, spent her remaining years, however many she had, however long a century-old woman trapped in aged body could survive, cooking, cleaning, existing as human rather than monster. The curse was broken. The punishment ended. The debt Gaunter O'Dimm intended to collect for eternity, her suffering, her isolation, her eternal hunger, went uncollected. Because O'Dimm had designed the curse cleverly, had embedded conditions that seemed impossible. But cleverness can work both ways. The loopholes existed in his own wording. She need not use a spoon to be sated. She simply needed to be sated without one. Someone need not want to dine with her. They simply had to dine with her willingly. She need not use a mirror. She simply had to see her reflection somehow. The curse's language had gaps, and someone found them. Did not trick O'Dimm exactly. The conditions were met honestly, without deception, but met them in ways O'Dimm had not anticipated when he carved those words into stone and walked away from a woman who had refused basic hospitality. Another empty page in the ledger, another debt uncollected, another failure, however minor, in the long accounting of Gaunter O'Dimm's dealings with mortals. Marlene lived, was human, was free. Master Mirror had designed a curse to be eternal, and it lasted merely a century before being broken. Ciri. The name meant different things to different people. To her grandmother, she was the lion cub of Sintra, princess and heir, the future of a proud dynasty. To the NL, She was the carrier of Laradoran's blood, the one who could reopen the pathways between worlds. To Geralt, she was daughter, not by blood, but by choice, by the law of surprise, by destiny or chance or both. To Gaunter O'Dimm, she was nothing, not because she was insignificant, quite the opposite. She mattered enormously. The elder blood flowing in her veins granted powers that reshaped reality, allowed travel between dimensions, made her potentially the most powerful being in any world she visited. But she was nothing to O'Dimm because she was beyond his reach. When the Witcher, desperate to find Ciri, to locate the one person who mattered more than his own life, asked if O'Dimm could help, the man of glass admitted limitation. "There are certain things," he said slowly, carefully, with tone that suggested this admission cost him something, "even I cannot meddle with. Ciri is hidden from my gaze. She is beyond my reach." The statement carried weight. O'Dimm, who could manipulate time with a clap of his hands, who could walk through air, who could transport people to realms of his creation, who seemed to know secrets that gods might envy. Even he could not find one young woman with white hair and a scar on her face. Why? The question remained unanswered. O'Dimm offered no explanation, simply stated the limitation as fact and moved on, but the implications were staggering. The elder blood itself may have protected her, that bloodline stretching back to Laradoran and further, to powers that predated humanity's arrival in this world, carried properties that appeared to place its bearer outside ordinary rules. The ability to move between dimensions perhaps meant existing in multiple realities simultaneously, or in none of them, or in spaces perpendicular to normal existence, where even O'Dimm's considerable reach could not extend. What seems apparent from O'Dimm's own admission is that he operates within certain boundaries. His power is vast within those boundaries, perhaps unlimited, or close enough that the difference does not matter. But the boundaries exist. He cannot cross between worlds the way Ciri can, cannot pursue her when she steps sideways into realities he cannot access. Another possibility is that her power simply exceeds his, that the elder blood, fully awakened, grants abilities that surpass even those of entities like O'Dimm, that he recognizes someone capable of threatening him and admits inability rather than risk confrontation with an equal or superior. Or perhaps, and this reading of his words gained support among those who understood his careful nature, he was lying by omission. Perhaps he could find Ciri if he truly wanted to, but had no interest in doing so. Perhaps he recognized her as someone too dangerous to approach, too powerful to manipulate, too likely to see through his tricks and turn them against him. Perhaps he was afraid, not of being destroyed. His claim that he could not be killed appeared genuine, but afraid of being challenged by someone whose power might actually be able to banish him permanently rather than temporarily. Afraid of meeting someone who could trap him the way he trapped others, who could write contracts in languages he could not twist, who could see through mirrors and reflections to the truth underneath. Whatever the reason, the effect was the same. Ciri represented a debt that could never be collected because she could never be caught, never be bound, never be trapped in carefully worded contracts or subjected to bargains at crossroads. She existed outside the systems through which O'Dimm operated. She was absence, a gap, someone who walked through multiple worlds without ever owing him anything, without ever falling into the patterns that snared so many others. The ledger had no page for her name, would never have a page for her name. She was uncollectible, not because she had escaped, but because she had never been catchable in the first place. And O'Dimm knew it, admitted it, moved on to other business without trying to hide or rationalize the limitation. This represented a different kind of failure, not a contract that went unfulfilled, not a soul that slipped away after being promised. Simply someone beyond reach, beyond influence, beyond the scope of his power, regardless of what bargains might be struck. The man of glass could not have her, could not touch her, could not add her name to the ledger no matter how much he might have wanted to. She was free in ways even those who escaped his contracts could never be, because she had never been at risk in the first place. In Rivia, in the aftermath of Nilfgaard's invasion, someone found a contract hidden in an abandoned estate. Old parchment, carefully preserved in a sealed container, protected from decay and moisture and the passage of years. The writing remained clear despite obvious age, formal language, legal terminology, the kind of document drafted by someone who understood the importance of precise wording. I, Amadeus Ritterhoff, in exchange for thorough knowledge of the arcane magical arts, hereby pledge my soul. I shall repay my debt only at such a time when the sun rises over Rivia in the dark of night. I sign this contract with my blood in full understanding that it cannot, under any circumstance, be breached. The signature at the bottom, dried blood, brown with age, still somehow vibrant, had been made by a hand that trembled, whether from fear or anticipation, or simply the physical difficulty of cutting oneself deep enough to provide signing material remained unknowable. The date was absent. No indication of when this contract had been drafted. Could have been decades ago. Could have been centuries. The parchment's age suggested the former, but preservation magic might have maintained its apparent youth while actual years accumulated beyond counting. The clause seemed impossible. The sun rising at night represented a contradiction in terms. Day and night were opposites, mutually exclusive, defined by the presence or absence of solar illumination. The sun could not rise during night because sunrise created day by definition. The contract appeared safe, perfect, a bargain that granted knowledge of magic in exchange for a debt that could never be collected because the conditions could never be met. Amadeus Ritterhoff, whoever he had been, must have thought himself clever, must have believed he had found the perfect loophole, the impossible requirement that would let him keep both the knowledge and his soul indefinitely. Until Nilfgaard marched through Rivia with their banners flying, golden suns on black fields, the Empire's standard, recognized across the continent, feared in every kingdom that stood in its path. Massive banners, visible from miles away, announcing conquest and subjugation, and the inevitable absorption into Nilfgaard's growing dominion. The black represented night, darkness, the void. The banners flew against black backgrounds, making the golden sun stand out in stark contrast. And when Nilfgaard's forces entered Rivia, those banners rose over the city as actual night fell. The sun, rendered in gold thread, embroidered on dark fabric, rising over Rivia in the dark of night. The loophole fulfilled through war and conquest. Through human conflict, O'Dimm had no direct hand in arranging. Whether this was coincidence or orchestration remained unclear. O'Dimm's power was vast, but arranging an imperial invasion seemed beyond even his considerable reach. Nilfgaard's expansion had political motivations, strategic objectives, reasons that existed independently of any single contract signed by a now-forgotten mage seeking arcane knowledge. But the timing, the specific location, the precise fulfillment of conditions that seemed impossible, the way the banners rose exactly as darkness fell, meeting the contract's requirements with almost suspicious precision. This alignment suggests O'Dimm's influence may have extended further than most suspected, that he could manipulate geopolitical events, could nudge decisions and timing, could arrange circumstances across years or decades to ensure that impossible conditions became possible exactly when needed. Or perhaps it was genuine coincidence. Perhaps Amadeus Ritterhoff had simply been unlucky, had signed a contract with a clause he thought was safe that happened to align with events beyond anyone's control. Perhaps O'Dimm collected this debt through pure chance rather than design. Whether Amadeus Ritterhoff's soul was collected remained unknown. The contract existed. The conditions had been technically met, but no record confirmed whether O'Dimm appeared to claim what was promised. No witnesses reported a vagrant appearing at the moment Nilfgaard's banners rose. No stories circulated of a mage suddenly aging to dust or vanishing without trace. No evidence suggested the debt had been collected at all. This leaves several possibilities. The collection happened quietly, without witness. One more name added to the ledger, while others fought and died for reasons that had nothing to do with bargains struck in desperation. Or the debt remained uncollected. Perhaps Amadeus Ritterhoff had died before the conditions were met. Age or illness or violence stealing him before O'Dimm could claim his soul. Perhaps he had found a way to break the contract, some method not recorded, some escape that left the debt unpaid. Or perhaps, and this seemed less likely but could not be entirely dismissed, O'Dimm had chosen not to collect, had looked at the situation, assessed the soul in question, decided it was not worth the effort, had let this one slide because sometimes even Master Mirror had priorities that excluded every possible collection. The ambiguity was maddening. The contract existed as proof that a bargain had been struck. The conditions had been met, or at least met enough to satisfy any reasonable interpretation. But the outcome remained unknown. Another potentially empty page in the ledger. Another debt that might have been collected or might have gone unclaimed. Another situation where O'Dimm's accounting remained mysterious, inscrutable, deliberately vague. The contract was found years after Nilfgaard's invasion, found by someone exploring the abandoned estate, looking for salvage or treasure, or simply satisfying curiosity about what previous occupants might have left behind. They recognized enough of the formal language to understand this was significant, brought it to scholars who could translate the archaic phrasing. And scholars, reading the contract, recognizing the pattern, understanding what this represented, felt a chill that had nothing to do with temperature. Because if this contract existed, how many others were hidden in abandoned estates, sealed in forgotten vaults, tucked into corners of libraries where no one looked anymore? How many people had struck bargains with impossible clauses that were not actually impossible at all? How many souls had been promised in exchange for knowledge or power or wealth, secured by conditions that seemed safe but were merely waiting for circumstances to align? The Rivia contract represented not just one potential failure or success, but the possibility of countless others. Each one a mystery. Each one a story that might end with collection or escape. Each one a reminder that O'Dimm's reach extended further than most suspected, that his patience outlasted human lifespans, that his accounting covered timeframes ordinary mortals could not comprehend. Somewhere, other contracts waited, other impossible clauses, other desperate bargains struck by people who thought they had found perfect loopholes. And somewhere, Master Mir remembered them all, tracked them patiently, waited for conditions to align, for circumstances to change, for the impossible to become possible. The ledger had space for many names, would always have space. Because the deals continued, the bargains kept being struck. The desperate and ambitious and foolish kept meeting him at crossroads and thinking they could outsmart something that had been playing this game since before their ancestors were born. Most of those names would eventually be filled in. Most debts would be collected. Most clauses would be fulfilled. But some, perhaps, would remain empty. The failures, viewed collectively, suggested something crucial about Gaunter O'Dimm's nature. He could be beaten. Not easily. Not often. But possible. Definitely possible. For those clever enough and brave enough and lucky enough to find the gaps in his carefully constructed traps. The pattern emerged across cases. O'Dimm worked through language, through exact wording, through the space between what people said and what they meant. His power was vast. Manipulation of time, control over reality, abilities that seemed to approach omnipotence within certain boundaries, but he remained bound by his own rules. When someone found a genuine loophole in his contracts, he accepted the outcome. When challenged to a wager and beaten fairly, he honored the terms. When circumstances broke curses he had designed to be eternal, he did not simply reassert them through force. Why? The evidence suggests his nature demanded it. That entities like O'Dimm exist within frameworks that constrain them as surely as gravity constrains physical objects. That his power comes from making deals and honoring them, and breaking his word would undermine the foundation of that power. That he must keep his promises because his entire existence depends on the reliability of his contracts. What becomes clear from examining his methods is that O'Dimm cannot simply take souls through force, cannot simply appear and claim whatever he wants through raw power. He needs consent, twisted, manipulated, obtained through trickery and wordplay, but consent nonetheless. Needs people to agree to terms, to sign contracts, to accept bargains. And if those bargains can be escaped through the same careful language he uses to trap people, he must accept that, must honor the outcome, must let the soul go free because the alternative, breaking his word, ignoring his own contracts, would destroy the mechanism through which he operates. This reveals vulnerability. Not physical vulnerability. He claimed truthfully that he could not be killed, and nothing in any account suggested otherwise, but systemic vulnerability. His power operates within rules, and rules can be navigated by those who understand them well enough. Olgierd escaped because his contract contained an impossible condition that O'Dimm interpreted one way, while Olgierd interpreted another. When Geralt challenged O'Dimm to a wager, the man of glass could not refuse. His nature would not allow it. Gambling appeared fundamental to what he was, and turning down a properly offered challenge would violate something essential in his existence. Marlene escaped because someone fulfilled the curse's conditions in ways O'Dimm had not anticipated. The wording had loopholes, She need not use a spoon to be sated, just needed to be sated without using one. Someone need not want to dine with her, just needed to dine willingly. She need not use a mirror, just needed to see a reflection. The precision that made O'Dimm's contract so devastating also created opportunities for escape. Every word mattered. Every phrase carried exact meaning, and exact meaning could be fulfilled in unexpected ways. Shakeslock, if his death truly represented escape, rather than delayed collection, died outside the circle but free of any contracts binding. O'Dimm had promised protection within the circle and delivered it. Shakeslock's death came from stepping outside, from choosing, however accidentally, to leave the safety zone. The promise had been kept. The professor was safe from O'Dimm while in the circle. What happened outside was natural consequence, not O'Dimm's direct action. Ciri represented a different pattern entirely. She was unreachable, not through cleverness, but through power. Her abilities placed her beyond O'Dimm's scope, in dimensions he could not access, in realities he could not influence. She had not outsmarted him. She simply existed in a space where his rules did not apply. The key, for those who wanted to escape, was precision. O'Dimm worked through language, so defeating him required the same approach, required finding gaps in carefully constructed contracts, required being more precise with words than he was, which meant being extraordinarily precise indeed, required understanding that when O'Dimm said the moon, he might mean a mosaic rather than the celestial body, that when he created a curse about spoons and mirrors and dining, the specific wording mattered more than the general intent, that contracts could be challenged and wagers could be proposed and riddles could be solved, required, most of all, recognizing that Master Mirror, for all his power, was not beyond defeat, was not perfect, made mistakes, however rare, left gaps, however small. The empty pages in the ledger proved it, each one a crack in the facade of inevitability, each one evidence that the game was not entirely rigged, that the deck was not completely stacked, that victory remained possible for those willing to risk everything on a single challenge. But victory remained rare, precious rare. 2 souls in recorded history had beaten O'Dimm at his own game, one before Geralt, one after. Perhaps others had escaped through different means, death before collection, circumstances breaking curses, impossible clauses that remained impossible despite O'Dimm's patience. But compared to the filled pages in the ledger, compared to the countless souls collected across millennia, the escapes numbered almost nothing. Rounding errors in an accounting that stretched across ages, O'Dimm failed sometimes, but he succeeded far more often. The gaps existed, but they were narrow. The loopholes were real, but they were small. The empty pages were there, but they were vastly outnumbered by pages filled with names recorded in languages that predated recorded history. The Man of Glass still walked the world. The Witcher had banished him from that particular confrontation at the Temple of Lilvani, had solved the riddle and pulled him from the water's reflection, had sent him back to whatever realm he inhabited, when not making deals at crossroads and collecting souls at temples with moon mosaics on their floors. But death was beyond him. True defeat was impossible. I cannot be killed, he'd said in those final moments, speaking in languages that predated the languages of this world, speaking in tongues that came from realms this reality had never seen. I am leaving now, but I will be back. And he would be. The promise carried certainty, not threat exactly. O'Dimm did not threaten, did not make empty promises, did not engage in the kind of bluster that lesser entities used to inspire fear. Just statement of fact, acknowledgement of temporary setback combined with assertion of eventual return. Somewhere, someone would grow desperate, would stand at a crossroads, literal or metaphorical, facing a choice they could not make alone, would wish for something, power, wealth, love, revenge, knowledge, immortality, anything people wished for when pushed beyond normal endurance, strongly enough to make bargains they did not fully understand. O'Dimm would hear, would appear, would offer, and the cycle would continue. Another contract signed, another soul promised, another name eventually added to the ledger that had recorded such transactions since before human civilization emerged from barbarism. The pattern had repeated for millennia, would repeat for millennia more, because desperation was constant across human existence, and desperate people made poor decisions, and O'Dimm offered solutions that seemed perfect until the debt came due. In Toussaint, months or years after Marlene was freed, A certain music played when Geralt recounted her story to his major domo. A theme. Distinctive, unsettling, instantly recognizable to anyone who had heard it before. The theme that accompanied Gaunter O'Dimm's presence, that signaled his influence, that marked his territory the way predators marked theirs. The music played in a place O'Dimm had not visited, or at least had not visited in any way, that left evidence beyond a curse broken by a witcher who understood what words truly meant. The music suggested he was watching, listening, aware of the outcome, aware that another debt had gone uncollected, that another curse had been broken, that another empty page existed in his ledger. What did he think of that? Did it anger him? Did it amuse him? Did he care at all? Or were individual failures so rare and insignificant compared to his broader successes that they barely registered? The music gave no answers, just played, just reminded anyone listening that Master Mirror remained present in the world, remained aware, remained active. In White Orchard, years after the events at the temple, a group of dwarves mentioned selling a golden chalice to someone. Mr. Mirror or something like that, they said. Casual reference, throwaway comment, easy to miss. But the name was too close to be coincidence. Master Mirror, Mr. Mirror, the man of glass, acquiring objects, making purchases, engaging in normal commercial transactions, as if he were an ordinary merchant rather than an entity that collected souls and manipulated time itself. The dwarves survived the encounter, sold their chalice, received payment, walked away unscathed. But the fact that O'Dimm was there, was active, was continuing to operate in the world, that fact carried weight. He had not been destroyed at the temple, had not been banished permanently, had simply been removed from that specific situation, sent away from that particular confrontation, made to honor the terms of a wager he had lost. But he remained, would always remain, could not be killed, could not be destroyed, could only be temporarily avoided by those clever enough to outsmart him in games he had been playing since before their ancestors knew how to speak. In the game of Gwent, the card game that had swept across the northern kingdoms, becoming more popular than anyone expected, cards bearing O'Dimm's image appeared in expansions. The Gaunter O'Dimm card, Gaunter O'Dimm, darkness cards, images showing him with his wooden spoon, the symbol that had become associated with his casual cruelty after he killed a drunk man in the tavern. The killing itself, O'Dimm claimed it was because the man had interrupted their conversation. Whether this was genuine reason or arbitrary cruelty, disguised as justification, no one could say. The drunk had done nothing truly offensive, had simply been drunk and talkative, had approached at the wrong moment, had died for it. The card's abilities were appropriately thematic, giving enemies the doom status, destroying units marked for death, powers that reflected his nature, patient, inevitable, working through systems rather than brute force. Even in a game, even in entertainment, his presence persisted. His image circulated. His name was spoken. People who had never met him, who had no idea what he truly was, carried representations of him and used them without understanding what they represented. What this meant to him, if anything, remained unknowable. Perhaps having his image spread across the world through a card game amused the entity that collected souls and manipulated time. Perhaps it annoyed him, reducing him to game piece, to entertainment, to trivia. Or perhaps he didn't care at all. Perhaps human games and human entertainment meant nothing to something that existed on his scale, across his time frame, with his perspective on eternity. The world continued turning. People continued living. Empires rose and fell. Wars started and ended. Monsters prowled and were slain. Mages cast spells. Witchers hunted contracts. Life happened in all its messy complexity. And somewhere in that world, at crossroads where two paths met, Gaunter O'Dimm waited. Not always, not everywhere, but sometimes, in certain places, at certain times, when desperation reached critical levels, when wishes became strong enough to reshape reality, when people stood alone facing choices that would define the rest of their existence. He waited, he offered, he collected. The ledger remained open, patient as stone, as inevitable as winter, waiting for more names, knowing more names would come, accepting that some pages would remain empty while most would be filled. Because even Master Mirror, for all his power, for all his careful contracts and twisted words, could not close every gap, could not predict every outcome, could not prevent those rare individuals who saw the traps clearly enough to avoid them. The crossroads waited, the bargains would be struck, the debts would be collected, except for the ones that would not be, except for the souls that slipped through fingers that had grasped so many others, except for the names that should have been inscribed but remained absent, except for those precious few victories in a game where the dealer controlled every card except the one that mattered most, the will of individuals to refuse, to challenge, to outsmart something that seemed beyond outsmarting. The empty pages existed, would continue to exist, would remind Master Mirror, if he needed reminding, that perfection eluded even entities that seemed beyond mortal limitation. Sometimes the moon was just a mosaic on a floor, and clever wording could not change that. Sometimes a curse could be broken by those who understood what words truly meant. Sometimes a riddle had an answer the one who posed it did not want found. And sometimes, rarely, precious rarely, but sometimes, the debt went uncollected. The ledger remained open, waiting, patient, but so did the possibility of escape. For those brave enough to challenge, for those clever enough to find the gaps, for those lucky enough to survive the attempt. The man of glass could not have every soul, could not collect every debt, could not add every name to his eternal accounting. Some pages would remain empty forever, and that, perhaps more than anything else, was what made the failures matter. Not because they were common, but because they were possible. Not because they represented the norm, but because they proved the norm could be broken. Master Mirror had limits, had vulnerabilities, could be beaten, not easily, not often, but beaten nonetheless, and knowing that made all the difference. If this journey through the ledger's empty pages has proven worthwhile, consider exploring more of the Witcher's world and the entities that inhabit it. The stories waiting in darkness are numerous, and some of them, have endings that surprise even those who think they control every outcome.